blessings in Jesus' name. So I've been saying it for a little while, that there's a term currently in legislature, which it's not. It's like they're pretending that it could be legislated for and that it's in legislature. Do you know what I'm saying? It's not actually in legislature because it didn't conform to the prerequisites for putting something into legislature. But then, do you know what they did? They said that they don't have to conform to the things in legislature, and they claim they have legislated for that. What do they take us for? We don't have to conform to the legislature. Yeah, that's obviously in the airways. There are spirits trying to prevent me from saying what I'm about to say, but it won't happen. We don't have to conform to the prerequisites to legislating something. Now stick that in the legislature. You see what I'm saying to you? Let's legislate for not having to carefully legislate. See what I'm saying? Well, how did they do that first legislation? They did it illegally. Because how do you legislate for something against proper legislating? We can't do it. There's no access to do it. See, what I'm saying is, how do you enter into a room there's no entering into to tell everybody they can enter into it? So legislating for not having to properly legislate can't actually happen. So they've only pretended it did. So they're pulling the wool over your eyes, telling you to fall on your own pike. They're saying the president doesn't have to check whether a bill is constitutional or not before adding it to the legislature. But that's not true. But they say, well, we've legislated for that. Who did? Who legislated for such a thing? That's mindless. We legislated to change the rules so that you don't have to comply with the rules. I mean, think about that. Actually, we've altered the rules so that there's no certainty as to what the rules are. Do you see how nonsense that is? Now let me explain specifically how, because your mind might be searching now. Presumptively constitutional. What does that mean? Presumptively constitutional is a contradiction in terms. Presumptively lacking evidence, constitution, the evidence. How can you lack evidence of the evidence when it's written down? It's called the written law, or in another term, the Constitution, or in Irish, Bunreacht na hÉireann. So Bunreacht na hÉireann is the written law of the land. So how can you be presuming what it is when it's written down? How can anybody reasonable in their right mind think that that's ever going to be permissible without breaking the law? So you couldn't actually affect that. You couldn't bring it about. You could not bring about something in legislature changing the parameters and prerequisites of legislature. You couldn't do it. So you couldn't have a constitution. Right? You couldn't. So, can you presume that I have a covering on my head? No, you can't presume it because you can see it. Can you presume that I'm speaking through a microphone? No, because you can see that I am and hear that I am. So, you can't presume that I am. Therefore, and very simply, and I've been repeating this and I'll continue to, you cannot presume and know something. So when you're presuming something constitutional, you can't know whether it is or it isn't constitutional. If you're presuming it's constitutional. So how can the person whose job it is to make sure the Constitution is upheld tell people not to know the Constitution? By presuming it's the case. You can't lawfully do that. That's totally unreasonable. Can you imagine trying to play a game of soccer and the referee didn't tell you the rules in advance? Or they're not even available to you, but he says, just presume everything I say is the rules. And then he starts making them up as he goes along. Sure, how could you play the game? We added stuff, just pretend. You can't do that. You can't, especially with the Constitution. We're not talking about a game. We're talking about something that ensures the common good can be upheld. We're talking about systems that have been refined over thousands of years and haven't really changed a whole lot at their rudiments. So fundamentally, the Constitution of Ireland is just known to be compliant to that which is good for societies, plural. So the entire Western world implements the same systems as Ireland because they work. And have done. They've been proven to work. So departure from them is deliberately bringing harm upon the nation. So you don't just... the President can't just say, OK, we're not going to follow the Constitution of Ireland anymore. If he comes out and says that, people might raise their eyebrows. What? He's the custodian of the Constitution. It's the President's job to uphold the law. We actually pay him to do that. We pay the President to uphold the Constitution. Now he's telling us we can't be sure what it is. So if we can't be sure what it is, we can't make sure he's upholding it, can we? You see? If you don't know the rules of football, you can't be sure that the ref is properly refereeing. You see? So if a ref wanted to bring in his own agenda and his own will and start manipulating the game, he could do so a lot more easily if the players didn't know the rules, couldn't he? So do you see the incentive behind telling the players not to know the rules? The members of society to only presume things lawful, in other words? Do you see why somebody would do that? Because I believe Michael D. Higgins is a Freemason, and Freemasonry has a separate agenda to the Constitution of Ireland. One that is against the common good and promoting of immoral behaviour. And that's why he wouldn't give you certainty as to what the laws of Ireland are, so that you have no expectation that he will fulfil his role because of your ignorance. Now, we're not just talking about remaining ignorant. We're talking about ignorant compliance with that which is unlawful because they've claimed they haven't even checked it, you see. So how are they trying to remain blameless in the eyes of you? They try to remain blameless in the eyes of you because they say, we didn't even check. We didn't even check whether this was lawful or not. So you can't blame us because we didn't check. And then they lie to you and they say, well, we don't have to check anymore. We legislated that we don't have to check what's lawful and what isn't before we add it to the legislature anymore. You say, what? Sure, that's not a reasonable standard of operation. You're not going to check whether things are constitutional or not? Why? Why would anybody think that that's a step forward? It might be a step forward into the bottomless pit, but it's not a step forward for the society as a whole and the common good. Do you see the point? So, when the President lies to you and says something is presumptively constitutional, or the Court of Appeal in Ireland does the same, they commit treason and sedition. Because the Constitution of Ireland is written down. We can't be presuming what's written down because we have evidence. You make presumptions on the lack of evidence. They don't have any lack of evidence. Actually, it's ridiculous to think that the President who studied constitutional law at any stage lacks evidence as to what it is. That's ridiculous. The President who studied constitutional law presumes things constitutional? That's like saying a mechanic looks at an engine without thinking about its components. The President can't look at a bill and not think about the constitutionality of it because he's trained in constitutional law. That's an impossibility for somebody who's trained. It's like a doctor looking at you at an x-ray and pretending he doesn't know anything. One who's studied reading x-rays and the musculoskeletal system is looking at an x-ray and pretending he doesn't know what he's looking at. Or worse, the mechanic that you send the car to, listen, the mechanic is saying to you, that is an NCT pass, but I didn't look at the engine. Just presume that that's an NCT pass, but I didn't look at the engine of the car. I didn't check the components. I didn't run it through the test. But pretend that it passed the NCT. That's what presumptively constitutional looks like. Presumptively an NCT pass. What? Why do you even have the testing centre then? Why do you even have the safety standards? Why did you even study as a mechanic? So you say, presumptively constitutional? Why did you study constitutional law? Why do we pay you as custodian of the Constitution if you're only telling us to pretend what it is? Presumptively constitutional. Pretend that it's constitutional, in other words. So what happens if you know the Constitution and your government tells you to pretend you don't? They incite you to crime along with them. They ask you to take their hand in the destruction of the nation. And I'm not going to take their hand. I'm not going to see your children suffer because of your lack of care. I'm not going to do that. That would be harming your children myself, because I know better. And you know when somebody says, I told you now so my hands are clean? It's because they've brought it to your attention and it's your station to implement. I can't father your children, I can't daddy your children. You have to. But I can tell you how you're not doing it right. And then once I've done that, I can't do any more for your children. So what I'm doing is I'm telling you that your president is committing treason and sedition by pretending that he doesn't have to uphold the Constitution when that's fundamentally his office. Fundamentally, the job of the president is take the Constitution as it is and hand it to the next generation. He takes it into his custody. He takes care of it. He's the caretaker of the Constitution. See how that works? So if he's the caretaker of the Constitution, why is he telling people to pretend things are constitutional? Why isn't his prerequisite standard that everything must be constitutional before it's written into operation as legislature? Because if he's not doing that, if he's not checking everything as a prerequisite before adding it to the legislature for its constitutionality, he's effectively fighting against you and your rights and the generations that will come after us. He's fighting against the generations that went before us, that struggled with their lives, the pikeman. He's fighting against anybody who ever valued the proper implementation of well-functioning systems for the upholding of the common good. And if you turn a blind eye to it, you bring that on your household. And you'll see the harm of it. It will attack your household. So it's my job as your fellow man, as your fellow Irishman, to raise the alarm. And that's what I've been doing for a long time here. A long time I've been raising the alarm. While they're still shaking hands down the Freemasonic Lodge thinking they're the boss. And they're imposters and occupiers making a mess of this society if you let them. And if God allows them. But it won't be for a lack of me telling you. It won't be for a lack of God sending somebody to raise the alarm, will it? No. So what I'm saying to you is I love you, I care about you, I care about your household, I care about the proper implementation of the Constitution of Ireland, and I care about the well-being of this nation and other nations. So if you're not going to uphold the Constitution in the parts that you know work, you're bringing an army against your house. And they're not coming with AK-47s. They came with the quill, with the pen. And that's how they attacked your house. That's how they plundered your goods. That's how they drove the sword through your chest. And now they're asking you to drive it through your own. Pretend that you have a constitution, and they'll tell you what it is. And don't check, because we won't, they're saying, whether it's constitutional or not. And you should have no expectation that we would do such a thing. That's sedition. That is treason. And you have an occupying force in your government now, a Freemasonic force, who are committing that conspiratorial attack against the nation. So it's exposed. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in Lord Jesus would not perish but have everlasting life.